So I was racing a triathlon, punctured midway through the bike leg on a set of tubular wheels, looked out on the market. There didn't really seem to be anything that really fit what I was looking for. So set out to say, well, how hard can it be to do this myself? And 10 years later, I'm still here trying to answer that question. Composites and carbon fibre in particular are unrivaled in terms of the combination of lightweight, in terms of formability, in terms of mechanical properties. Take an old rim, let's reprocess it locally into a newer design, but retaining as much of the existing material as possible. I want to be able to demonstrate the benefits of this material, of this incorporation, and of this engineering to the extent where, firstly, the rest of the cycling market can't ignore it any further.
Today's sponsor is Composite Source. Sourcing the right materials and tech for your composites project shouldn't slow you down. They are your ultimate US-based procurement partner, handling everything from raw materials and custom manufacturing to specialized industry staffing. Stop searching and let the experts scale your production. Visit composite-source.com or click the link within the description. Thanks again for welcoming us here at Parcours Wheels. We went through the product development cycle, the ideas you implemented since 2016, what is coming in the future. But now let's come back to 2016, eventually before that. Tell us more about your background.
Yeah, so I actually grew up playing a lot of high-level sport. I actually played field hockey at a fairly high level in my youth. So was always part of a performance sports background, but also was fascinated by the world of engineering. So went off to university to study engineering and went into the world of aerospace through that. So I interned and had a young person's role at a subsidiary of British Aerospace, coincidentally down in Filton in Bristol, so just down the road from the National Composite Centre that Liniac came out of. Spent some time working there in between my university studies, and then after university actually went into the world of finance. So I went into investment banking for a number of years. It was an interesting time. My first day in the office was 15th of September 2008. So the day that Lehman Brothers went bankrupt.
Yeah.
So I never quite saw the good times, but it then turned into a very, as you can imagine, all-consuming lifestyle. So I'd stopped exercising, I'd stopped doing anything active, focusing on my career, but picked up cycling as part of the 2012 boom in the UK. So we had the combination of the Olympics in London, but also Bradley Wiggins and the Tour de France. Yeah. So took up cycling as my kind of route back into exercise, I suppose, and found that the bug really bit. Followed the well-trodden path to then decide, rather than being mediocre at one sport, I should take up triathlon and be even more mediocre at three. And really started taking part in more and more events there. And the business actually came out of that in the first place. I was racing a triathlon at Eton Dorney, just down the road in the UK, and punctured midway through the bike leg on a set of tubular wheels. Obviously that's race over, and decided it was time to buy some new wheels. I looked out on the market to see what there was, and there didn't really seem to be anything that really fit what I was looking for, I suppose. So at the time, you could either go for one of the legacy established brands with the associated price tag, or you could basically take your chances with a direct from factory product from the Far East that didn't really have any substance or backing behind it. So I suppose you could say I was my own first customer in terms of looking for something that I would want to buy. And the timing just worked out really well. I was looking for the next step in my career, and it really fell at the intersection of entrepreneurship, wanting to do my own thing, but also my then new passion of cycling, and also being able to call on my experience and education in engineering. So set out to say, well, how hard can it be to do this myself? And 10 years later, I'm still here trying to answer that question.
Yeah, you mentioned, so you have an engineering background and then you moved to finance. What was the motivation there?
I think a lot of it was, I suppose, down to the speed of execution. I think at the time I was working in defence, which particularly within that sector, the project timescales are very long. I think that it really hit home when I was talking to somebody in the cafeteria at lunch who was saying that he'd basically worked on the same product or project for 40 years. And I guess that wasn't really for me. I think I wanted something a little bit faster moving, and something that I could see a bit more of an impact in. And I suppose, there was a combination of wanting to make that impact. And then, as a 21-year-old, I think, the idea of earning a bit of money is always nice as well. Obviously with the timing, that wasn't so ideal, but no, it gave me sort of more of an opportunity, I suppose, to expose myself to the commercial world as well. And it was really fun, actually, for a long time. I think, I suppose that the reason for me wanting to move on was, I guess I got to the point where it was either going to be my life and my life's work, or it was going to be the stepping stone to something else. And I think I decided at that point that, after 8 years in finance, I wanted it to be something that would be my own, and sort of something that I was in charge of. And I suppose it sort of came up at a very opportune moment in life. Not having too many commitments, having the opportunity to take a chance and sort of say, well, to some extent, it's now or never. Don't want to die wondering. Let's see where this takes me. So I set out on the journey, and I joke, but every so often I like to look back at my very first business plan that I wrote for Parcours back in the day. It was written in early 2016, so just before Brexit. Looking at some of the FX forecasts at the time, they were optimistic, shall we say? But no, and to say, well, this is how I envisaged the build of the business from day one, and looking back at what's different now is quite interesting, shall we say? But no, it's very much driven by wanting to, first of all, I'd say, be in a position where I could make an impact, and then in terms of my own business, then combining that with being in a position where I could make the decisions and be more in control.
Yeah, so that's from a flat tire to building up a business. Obviously, you build up skills also. I mean, you have your engineering background. We'll come back to that. And we spoke about a lot of technical topics where you go pretty deep. And then obviously you have also the business side, which obviously you learned in a banking field, which probably helps you. I mean, you were mentioning the FX topics and so on in a business plan. I'm not sure you see that in all business plans from engineers. So that's certainly something you carry from your background. And from setting up a business, but also developing it over time, how much do you rely on your skill set from your experience, and how much is basically, as when we build up our own businesses, being reactive, being open to opportunities, whatever comes to you?
I mean, I think it's a combination, right? I think skills and experience take you so far, but it's knowing how to use them and how to adapt and how to react to situations that really helps you to stand out. And I think it's invaluable having the basis for what I'm doing. So having both the technical knowledge and basis for understanding the engineering of the product, but also having the financial and numerical background to be able to look at the more commercial side of things. Saying that, I think, you still have to learn very quickly when you start out on your own effectively. I think back to probably week 2 when something as small as the printer running out of ink happens, but suddenly you realize you don't have an IT team who are going to come and fix that for you. Or when you take on your first employee, you don't have an HR department who are going to advise you on employment law or that sort of thing. So you do have to sort of both leverage your existing skills, but be very open to picking up new skills very quickly. But also knowing what you can, I suppose, knowing your limitations. I think that was something that I learned very quickly, was saying, well, these are the things that I can do. These are the things that I could have a go at. And these are the things that I really shouldn't have a go at. And that's where you need to be willing and open to asking for advice or support or even assistance externally. So yeah, it is a balance, right? I think you need to ultimately know yourself, know your abilities, but also know your capacity. And then I think as well, sort of understanding where, as a founder, where your time is best spent. I think quite often it's very easy to get carried away with tasks that maybe you're good at, or maybe you enjoy, but perhaps your time isn't best spent there.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I learned a little bit later, is saying, well, yes, I can do this. Yes, I enjoy doing this, but actually my time is better spent elsewhere. And maybe I need to find somebody else to do this for me. So again, and that's a learning process that perhaps you don't think of on day one. So I think look, I'm very fortunate that I've come into this with a background and a baseline of ability, experience, and skill. But equally, I think you'd be foolish to think that that's all you need. And it's that openness and capacity to learning and to developing yourself and learning from mistakes as well. I think you've got to accept that you will make mistakes and things will go wrong, but it's how you deal with it and how you react to it that ultimately gets you through. And maybe some of that resilience is something I picked up in banking in particular. You just have to get on with it. You have to knuckle down and just do better next time.
Yeah, I think part of this resilience is something you find also in high performance sports. I mean, you're training and it's very planned, but then they are also race dynamics on D-Day, which make your plan kind of fall apart, and you have to find another way to react and make the best out of it. But coming back now, we are 10 years into the company. How has the company grown? You can give some numbers. Who are the people now working with you? And eventually, from what you have planned, what has been positive and eventually a negative surprise over the last 10 years?
I mean, in terms of how the business has grown, I think I've always said that for me the biggest metric isn't necessarily a headline number. It's more a perception. When I set out to start this business, I didn't have an end game in mind in terms of I want to sell X thousand, X tens of thousand number of wheels or pounds, dollars, euros in terms of revenue. It was more in terms of being positioned and perceived as a go-to option in the market. And I think, we've had some successes, we've had some challenges. I think learning very quickly that different segments of our market, even within cycling, respond very differently. Yeah. I think we've had huge success in the triathlon market, very well recognized brand there. Whereas I think on the road side, it's a more commoditized market, and it's more driven by sort of relationships within the industry, with sort of bike brands, with retailers, with distributors. So it's just adapting the business model to that. I think, the biggest successes for me more come with the relationships and the partnerships that we have. So it's things like seeing our product being chosen by bike brands to launch their new bikes with, or seeing our wheels leading athletes to world titles or Paralympic medals or whatever it might be. And then just on a very basic level, for me, probably the real sort of moment that it hit me was a few years ago now, just rolling up to some traffic lights out on a ride, and came across the first person on a set of Parcours wheels who I didn't recognize, I didn't know, and I'd never interacted with, and thinking, actually, do you know what, this product's out there now. So yeah, it's a journey, and it's something that we're still working on. I think, that we've got really exciting plans in the works for the coming months and years. For me, the Strada GT and the VibraCore project is kind of the first step on that road. It's the next vehicle for growth, if you like. And so we're looking at that and sort of saying, well, how do we really leverage that? Because I suppose when we started and when I first began the business, you could say that we were playing 20 years worth of catch up with the legacy brands in terms of technology and product. Okay. Then 5 years ago, when we launched the Strada, which was our first in-house design product, I'd say that was the moment that I felt like we'd caught up and we were starting to push the envelope a little bit. And then now here we are with our new launch, where I can genuinely say that, in this aspect, we're leading the field now. And that for me is really exciting. That's what really gets me out of bed in the morning, is that sort of pushing the performance forward, and feeling like here we have something that is genuinely unbeatable. That for me is the metric that I determine success with, rather than pure financials, I suppose. Yeah. And it's been a process to get here. I think, I mentioned some of the successes. We've had great moments with, seeing our product with partners on exciting new bike launches, seeing our athletes leading world championship races, and then the challenges are countless, right? The cycling industry has really been through the ringer the last few years. I think, yes. COVID obviously had its impact. I think maybe it's fair to say, as an industry, we didn't respond brilliantly to it. Big picture. I think people expected the initial growth in demand through lockdown to be sustainable. Bad decisions were made. I don't think we made too many at the time, but we're still feeling the effects within the broader industry. And then just, I think probably the single biggest challenge and the single biggest creation, sort of cause of stress to me, I suppose, is that sort of bigger geopolitical picture, whether it's Trump and his tariffs, whether it's all the way back to Brexit, whether it's cost of living crisis, whether it's, even today with the situation in the Middle East, that logistics challenge, the global picture that has a knock-on impact. And, as a smaller business, we're probably more vulnerable to it than some. So it just comes back to that adaptability and accepting that there are things we can control and there are things we need to respond to. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge. And perhaps, had I known differently 10 years ago, would I have made some different decisions? Sure. But you go on what you know at the time and respond accordingly.
I think that's the beauty of entrepreneurship. At some point, if you plan everything, you would not start.
No.
And then you go further with skills and curiosity, reactivity.
Yeah.
They're going back to curiosity, because obviously you start saying, well, I do my own wheel. So going back to Matthias, because I mean, besides being passionate by cycling, I love composites. So it's obvious 2016 you start to make a wheel or to design a wheel, you will pick up composites for the rim. And then what brings you to, okay, just use composite because it's used in the industry, to, okay, let's go to the holistic design. I think because design is not just shape, which also changed a lot over the last 10 years. We saw the rim from 2016, very narrow, very different in design than today with the bigger tires also. But then also challenging on the material selection, on the manufacturing eventually in the future. So yeah, what brings you, or what brings the engineer in you back to those choices?
I mean, I think starting out, it was very clear to me that from a performance angle, which is how I very much wanted to anchor the business, I think it's fair to say that composites and carbon fiber in particular are unrivaled in terms of the combination of lightweight, in terms of formability, in terms of mechanical properties. There just isn't anything else that can currently compete. So for me, yes, there is a pricing benefit of using, say, an aluminium rim, but for a business that I wanted to be focused on performance, that didn't feel like the right direction to be taking. So I think in terms of where I went from there with product design, development, and specifications, I think it was a case of building it step by step. So to begin with, saying, right, here we are, we're using a composite design. What do we then start to tailor, and what do we then start to improve on? And to begin with, that was very much through shaping, through profile, through aerodynamics.
Yeah.
Then we moved into looking at other aspects of performance and what does that mean for a cyclist? What else matters? And how do we tailor the products towards that? And then more recently saying, well, within composites, what other aspects of performance can we control by, again, not just tailoring the shape, but by tailoring the physical makeup of the material. And that was where I was able to say, well, we can take another step change in performance, and we can deliver something that doesn't just incrementally improve things. I think as an industry within cycling and performance, I feel like we've been stuck in a cycle over the last couple of years of every new product that's launched being 50 grams lighter, being 3 watts faster. Those to me don't feel like step changes in performance. And so I wanted to break that cycle and say, well, what else can we look at to say, where does the next leap forward occur? And that's why we started looking into this materials aspect. And it was then through discussions with partners like Lineat in particular to be able to say, well, here is a material that adds a new angle to the performance aspect of the wheel. And then going down that process of how do we actually start to capture it? How do we start to tailor a product around it? And how do we start to then also communicate it? Because I think that's another important aspect of coming back to the commercial reality of something. If you can't explain to your end user, to your consumer, why this is better, then it's not better.
Yeah.
And I think there is an education piece in there because people become very attuned to what a particular material might do. People have a preconceived notion of what a carbon fiber product does and how it does it.
Yeah.
And so even though we are still using a carbon fiber composite material, actually we need to think about its performance and properties in a different way. And so part of what we're doing is bringing people along the journey with us and educating people as saying, these are the benefits and this is why we should be thinking about this.
And you say educating. I think that's very important because, I mean, we often hear brands or engineers saying, "Oh, I mean, the end user is not asking for that." So then, but then also it's educating the end user. It's also educating the industry partly, because I mean, it's always a matter of chicken and egg. Okay, does the industry need to educate itself, or is actually Composite in this matter needing to bring something to the cycling industry and to other industries? I think it's a back and forth, but it always needs these ambassadors. Say in this case, you're kind of an ambassador by curiosity. You push the boundaries. You benefit from a certain ecosystem. You spoke about Linear, Uplift 360, and this kind of ecosystem then shaping eventually some innovation, and this innovation can be spread across the industry and to other users.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when you say is the end user, whether that's us as a brand in cycling or our end user as a rider, are they asking for it? Well, maybe they're not asking for it, but part of that is, do they even know that it exists, or do they know it's possible, or do they know that it's something to consider?
Yeah.
So I think it's important that we don't just close ourselves off to the current status quo. And I think that's, to some extent, how you get trapped in those incremental gains, rather than saying, let's take a step back, let's think outside the box. Can we take a step change? And sometimes that's more of a risk. And yeah, I think I like to think that, you know, by doing this particular project with this particular aspect, can we educate more broadly? Yes. Can we act as a proof of concept for perhaps industries outside of cycling or even sports, hopefully, and, you know, begin to make others ask the same questions perhaps that I was asking 18, 24 months ago.
And you were speaking about the challenge of logistics, obviously, because, I mean, it's an industry heavily relying on material in some parts of the world, processing in some others, and then obviously all the shipping in between. So do you see this reclaiming of material from your end users, which is more regional, as tapping into a new mine, a more local mine of materials?
Potentially, yeah. And I think that will be the challenge. As you know, it's easy to sit here as we are today with something that is still relatively small scale. We're still ultimately proving a concept. Taking that to sort of a broader audience and to more widely accepted implementation is always going to be the challenge. The scalability of the process is the challenge. And, you know, we have to think about not just physical logistics, but also, I suppose, the economics and the behavioral aspect of it. How do we incentivize our customers or our suppliers or, you know, wider industry suppliers to take up this process? So yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges around it. And, you know, one of the questions that I was asked around this project in particular from the sustainability angle is, well, you're taking a material that is processed in the UK, but we're still using Asian manufacturing and then redistributing the product back in the UK. And logistically, that's not ideal, of course. But again, it's taking logical steps and incremental changes to our processes and saying, well, yes, of course, the end game, or the end goal rather, I would love to say, well, we can onshore more manufacturing, but we need to some extent, walk before we can run here. And say, well, it's not perfect, but frankly, if we were to wait for perfect, we would never actually do anything. So it's deciding at what point do you just take the jump, say, right, we're going to do this because we're at the point where we've got something meaningfully better. And then we're going to sort of continue to work on the process, similar to how we design a product. We're going to iterate the process and improve it incrementally. So yeah, I think, you know, longer term, bigger picture, yes, I think there is that sort of localization aspect where it would be lovely to almost to be able to say within our product, well, let's take an old rim, let's reprocess it locally into a newer design, but retaining as much of the existing material as possible, reducing the impact of the product, but maintaining and actually improving the performance.
Yeah.
That is a genuinely admirable and sort of desirable place to get to. But in order to get there commercially, we have to take these steps. And it's understanding the balance. I think that's going to be the challenge from here, is saying we can't just sit back and say, job well done, everybody. This is a great piece of engineering. We need to sit here and say, this is a really good proof of concept for something that is genuinely new and innovative. But we need to keep pushing. We need to keep making this better. And so yeah, sort of looking to say, well, what do we need to do that? And that's going to be the next challenge, I think.
So it's interesting. So you are a wheels company, or a wheel manufacturer, developer, manufacturer. But then from the wheel, you see that you could shape a kind of flywheel principle. So going beyond the wheels, I mean, we can think other pieces of equipment, components on a bike, but eventually bridging out to other industries, obviously, because it's not easy, but it's certainly easier. And I mean, you bought your freedom by making your own company. So you are basically giving yourself the freedom to decide going this path, but also triggering the interest, proving the point on eventually some future supply chains.
I think that's the aim, and I think, you know, I suppose it's finding, again, it comes back to balance, finding the right balance between what we can push and what we should, I suppose, facilitate, because, you know, you can, as the saying goes, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. We can demonstrate this, but we can't enforce it. But I'd like to think that we start where we are currently with a performance wheel within the cycling world. But I want to be able to demonstrate the benefits of this material, of this incorporation, and of this engineering to the extent where, firstly, the rest of the cycling market can't ignore it any further. And then, you know, you could say, well, if cycling as an industry picks this up, then do we get to the point where the rest of the sporting industry can't ignore it any further? And then do you get to the point where other industries can't ignore it because the noise is getting amplified each time? Yeah. So, you know, we start where we are and we do our very best without losing focus on our, I suppose, key stakeholders, i.e. our riders, and delivering the best product to them. But equally, bigger picture, it makes sense to use that as a vehicle to bring the technology and to bring the innovation more widely. And I think that's almost the piece that excites me the most, because that's the bit that isn't limited by the size of the market, I suppose, or by the size of our current brand reach. So I think that's the piece where, you know, the outreach is important, and why I'm keen to say, you know, this isn't just a cycling topic anymore. This is something that hopefully is of interest to a wider audience, whether that's within sporting goods, whether that's within composites industry. I think there's a lot of interested parties that, you know, I would be happy to sort of share findings with. Yeah.
So that's a mission beyond the sheer business of making wheels or bike components.
I think so, and I think, you know, that probably fits into the 25th and 26th hours of my day now. So, you know, it takes a very full agenda and pads it out a bit more. But, you know, I've already seen that kind of this development was only made possible by looking outside of cycling. Yeah. So if that encourages me as a founder and us as a business to look further outside of our existing bubble, then surely that's only going to be beneficial all around.
Super interesting. And looking into the future, I mean, obviously you have your development roadmap, looking first of all for August 2026 on the 10th anniversary of the brand. And what is very exciting for you? I mean, beyond that, maybe in the next 2 to 5 years, where do you see Parcours will develop?
So, I mean, in the short term, I think from a product perspective, we have an implementation of this technology and use of this material for a specific application for riding on the road. I've alluded to the idea that we want to look at how this could be adapted for off-road riding with gravel. How do we capture the benefits in that specific use case? We've got our triathlon and time trial market that we want to ensure can benefit too. I think there's other pieces that we want to be looking at around sort of further incorporation of this, not just this specific material, but this kind of way of thinking outside of just profile, shape, and design within our product. And then, really sort of saying, well, what other use cases do we see? I mean, I don't know if I necessarily sit here thinking that we're going to branch out in the short term beyond wheels. I think, we've got a lot of work to do there, but at the same time, I like to think that from a business perspective, that this will open some new conversations for us in terms of sort of upstream supply, whether that's bike brands, distribution relationship, also just brand growth. We want to be sort of becoming more of a recognized brand as a result of this, and that's a marketing piece that we need to be aware of, and then at the same time, sort of using this as well as kind of the next springboard to say, well, just because we've done this one thing doesn't mean we then stop and don't sort of keep pushing. So easy thing to say, harder to execute, but kind of we want to stay abreast of the topics within the materials world to say, well, what other exciting developments are there? What other things should we be considering within that holistic design process that we use? Whether that's in terms of topical things like a 3D printing solution, whether that's in terms of sort of more localized manufacturing, whether that's in terms of end of life processing or any of these things. I think, I suppose it's really opened my eyes to the possibilities here, and saying, well, we've spotted this one, capitalized on it, but what's next?
Yeah. So really seeing it as a evolving lab, also not being close to any impulses.
I think so. And within that also, I think I'm very keen to be open and transparent with our findings and our development process, because it's always been an ethos of the business to be transparent, to be accessible, to be very open with our data, our development and testing. And actually, if that is something that we can use to build on within the industry, then that's also a good thing. Because bigger picture, as a composites user, we need to focus on circularity and sustainability more. We can't just hide behind the fact that cycling is a very eco-friendly sport in terms of participation. Yes. We need to think about the supply chain as well. And as an industry, we are seeing more and more focus on this. And so I think that the more we can bring this to people's attention, the more we can highlight it, the more it shines a light and will force and bring others along on the journey, so that as an industry we do better.
Yeah, I think it's a nice metaphor that the wheel manufacturer is pushing circularity.
The fully circular wheel is something we've always aspired to deliver, both in terms of the roundness, but also I think that sort of supply chain circularity is important too.
I mean, super interesting. Thank you so much, Dov, for the conversation, for hosting us today in your workshop, lab, whatever you call it. And eventually to close, how can people reach out to you? I mean, if it's people from the composite industry being interested to give you impulses, to get feedback on the product, but even potential customers, how to reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the easiest ways, the website is just parcours.cc. The joys of a small business is most of the contact form emails come through me in the end. You can find us on social media. We're most active on Instagram, so that's just at Ride Parcours. And then also just personally, I'm trying to do better on LinkedIn. I'm trying to be as responsive as possible, and also looking to sort of share a bit more of the business journey on there. So starting to give people a bit more access or coverage behind the scenes, just to tell the story of, I suppose, both the engineer in me, but also the founder. Because I think that, you know, as much as I like to think that people are interested, I also find it quite therapeutic. You know, life as a founder isn't always easy, and it can be quite lonely. So it's a nice way to do that. But yeah, please do reach out. You know, very interested to discuss more. If it keeps me distracted from the day job, all the better. But no, it's definitely something that I enjoy discussing. So please feel free to reach out, and, you know, by all means, I'd love to keep in contact and sort of be sure to share the next iteration of the project as well.
Sure. I mean, that's how it started 2 weeks ago on LinkedIn, and here we are recording with you.
There we go.
So, phenomenal, good example.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming down and sharing the time. It's been really interesting.
Sure. Thank you, Dov.
Great.
Appreciate it.